Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Shall We Wipe Cuba Off the Map? The Cuban Missile Crisis Day 1 by Time Goes History. Now, someone requested for me to watch this, and I'm now reacting to this. So it looks like it's a series. So I thought, what the hell? Thank you for the request, and I'll most likely make this into a react to the entire series. So, excuse me. So the usual disclaimer for react to anything historical: if I don't give so much of a proper reaction as, or what qualifies as a proper reaction, it's because it's probably obvious that I don't know much about the subject, and I'm trying to take in some new information to this brain, which hopefully works at some point. If there's anything I do know, I'll probably will chime in, add, or might have some curious questions which hopefully will be answered in the comments. So without rambling on too much longer, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go subscribe to Time Goes History. So, without further ado, let's get this up on the screen and let's get into this.
The prospect of nuclear holocaust.
Oh hey, it's Indy Nidal.
That might be how many people in the White House feel on the first day of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, I didn't know Indy Nidal was in this, because I last seen him on the History Channel, The Great War, which was talking about World War One. So and I thought Indy Nidal was a great host on that. So this should be quite good, because I think Indy Nidal is a great host for these sort of historical documentaries on YouTube. So first day of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oh yeah, President Kennedy.
I'm Indy Nidal. This is Time Ghost and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The weather is foggy in Washington, D.C. on the morning of Tuesday, October 16th, 1962. As the morning progresses, there's a drizzle of rain, but in the afternoon and evening it becomes a warm, sunny autumn day. The President of the United States of America, John F. Kennedy, begins his day with a meeting with one of the original Mercury astronauts, Wally Schirra, to congratulate him on his 9-orbit spaceflight 2 weeks earlier. Mostly, though, the day is spent in the fog of potential war with Cuba or even with the Soviet Union. 2 days ago, Air Force pilot Richard Heyer flew over the island of Cuba in a spy plane equipped with high-resolution cameras. The photos he brought back showed 3 installations of Soviet nuclear medium-range ballistic missile launch sites with SS-4 and SS-5 missiles waiting to be made deployable. The Soviets now have nuclear first strike capability and can launch an attack on the U.S. mainland just as quickly as the U.S. can on the USSR from Turkey or Italy. The CIA reported this to McGeorge Bundy, the president's national security.
So basically it's safe to say that this was tit for tat, basically. That the Americans put missiles in Turkey so they can threaten the USSR, and the little I know is Cuba invites the Soviets for them to use Cuba as a possible launch site. So that's pretty much little I know from the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Security advisor last night. Bundy tells Kennedy the news this morning at 8:45 and is now assembling the committee that will deal with the impending crisis. This group is the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, EXCOM for short. Over the coming 13 days, their deliberations and actions will hold the fate of humanity in their hands. Unknown to the members of EXCOM, though, the president records their conversations. Now in 2020, when the content of their meetings has been declassified, it gives us...
I think I saw somewhere that the Soviets were already doing this sort of covert, meeting recordings, like, well, let's just say for argument's sake, espionage, spying on conversations, like, trying to get the Soviets on side during World War II. So Stalin was in a better position for his negotiations more in favor of the Soviets. But I could be wrong. I probably didn't remember it properly.
Unprecedented documentation as to how this.
Sorry, it was a meeting to Sorry, I should have added in trying to get Stalin on side with furious negotiations between Stalin and I can't remember who was the US president at the time during the negotiation, but I know Winston Churchill was present, trying to get the Soviets on side for their fight against Hitler, which if you don't already know, eventually it all came together and eventually won the war against the Nazis. But anyway, I'm not going to ramble on too much longer about that.
Crisis was handled on the American side. XCOM was created during the Berlin crisis in 1961, specifically to avoid the mistakes that had been made during the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion earlier that same year. The decisions during that crisis had turned out, though, to be a textbook example of groupthink, the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. Let's have a look at the main members of XCOM and see where they stand before the first meeting. John F. Kennedy won the presidency after campaigning on making America stronger than the Soviet Union in nuclear weapons, closing the missile gap that assumed that the Soviets were ahead, although JFK was well aware that the missile gap was a myth and that America was actually already much stronger than the Soviet Union in terms of missiles. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson supported Kennedy's bluff in order to make the ticket look hard on communism, something their Republican opponent Richard Nixon had accused them of not being capable of. Secretary of State Dean Rusk is in favor of diplomatic solutions and a limited rapprochement with the Soviets. Secretary of the Treasury C. Douglas Dillon is a deeply anti-communist Republican businessman and longtime supporter of a hard line against the Soviets. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara has been alternating between calls for rapprochement and harder actions against the Soviets for the past year and a half. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother, leads efforts to maintain a dialogue with the Soviets and has direct personal contacts with Russian operatives, but he is a hardliner on Cuba. Only 2 weeks ago, on October 4th, he was made the unofficial chairman of Operation Mongoose, a covert CIA-led initiative to support an overthrow of Cuban leader Fidel Castro, or possibly even prepare for another Cuba invasion. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy is an ex-Navy man and a staunch advocate for a hard line against the Soviets. Director of the CIA John McCone was the first one to suspect a military buildup on Cuba earlier this summer. McCone is a longtime supporter of military action against Cuba and an advocate of increasing the nuclear advantage against the Soviets. U.S. Army Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Maxwell D. Taylor is a self-described twofold hawk from start to finish. The Joint Chiefs whom he represents are also deeply suspicious of the Kennedy brothers. Shortly after 11 a.m., October 16th, XCOM meets about Cuba for the first time. Secretary Rusk opens with a briefing on the situation. He goes on to explain the options at hand. First, he points out the possibility of eliminating the missile bases and even notes that this could, theoretically, involve the total destruction of Cuba.
Wow. Wow.
He then outlines the diplomatic options, including making Castro aware that the Soviets might be ready to take the destruction of Cuba into consideration in order to gain control of Berlin. This is something Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko had intimated to the press a few weeks back. In hindsight, we have multiple sources indicating that this may have been part of a ruse by the Soviets to divert attention from Cuba to Berlin and give them time to build up the secret missile sites without American interference.
Well, that
First
is a
Deputy
possibility.
Premier of the Soviet Union, Anastas Mikoyan, will tell Fidel Castro and the Cuban leadership on November 4th, "We let the Americans know that we wanted to solve the question of Berlin in the nearest future. This was done in order to distract their attention away from Cuba. So we used a diversionary maneuver. In reality, we had no intention of resolving the Berlin question at that time." The real reason for the missiles in Cuba is to even out the first nuclear strike capability created by the U.S. missile sites in Turkey. Secretary Rusk and CIA Director McCone seem to understand this full well.
About why the Soviets were doing this, McCone suggested some weeks ago that one thing Mr. Khrushchev may have in mind is that he knows that we have a substantial nuclear superiority, but he also knows that we don't really live under fear of his nuclear weapons to the extent that he has to live under fear of ours. Also, we have weapons nearby in Turkey and places like that.
The president immediately assesses the situation.
How many weapons do we have in Turkey? We have about 15, I believe.
Everyone agrees that the Cuban missile sites have to be eliminated, but how?
Well.
General Taylor is for surprise.
We're impressed, Mr. President, with the great importance of getting a strike with all that of surprise, which would mean ideally that we would have all the missiles that are in Cuba above ground where we can take them out.
He wants to mobilize forces along the Atlantic coast, gather more intelligence, and then take out the missiles. While the mobilization is in progress, he will assess the possibility of invasion, but also suggests a blockade to stop further missiles from coming in. The president opposes a blockade. In his view, it could be easily circumvented with submarines. They believe that it's unlikely that the Soviets will go to full-on nuclear war over Cuba, but Berlin might be in play. That being said, McNamara is concerned that the Cubans, not the Soviets, might have control over the missiles.
We don't know what kinds of communications the Soviets have with those sites. We don't know what kinds of control they have with the support.
In fact, Khrushchev has considered giving control over at least the tactical nuclear arms to Castro, though control over the actual ballistic missiles has never been an option. First Deputy Mikoyan opposed giving any control whatsoever to the Cubans and had prevailed, though McNamara's fears are justified in other ways, as we'll see in a few days. In the end, XCOM agrees to draw up a variety of plans for airstrikes to knock out the missile sites before they become operational, and to seriously consider invasion plans after that. They adjourn the meeting and will meet again in the early evening. When they do at 6:30 p.m., the discussion continues, and the lines now get drawn more clearly. The Joint Chiefs want to go for a full-scale airstrike to knock out all of the missiles and any and all military aircraft on Cuba. This can be done with 24-hour preparations anytime after the coming Friday. They also think that an invasion should be left on the table. Secretary Rusk wants to explore political and diplomatic options. He's especially concerned about the effects of military action on the rest of Latin America and on the NATO allies. He's convinced that the Soviets are not ready to use nuclear force.
I suppose that is the thing you got to consider. You consider NATO might not agree to a full invasion of Cuba, and it's I don't know what other countries' view would be on that if the Americans decided to invade Cuba in a full scale on a full scale sort of invasion. But as I said earlier, this is when it comes to the information that we get these. I think it's between the Americans and the Soviets is tit for tat, like, because I think that's the biggest things about these sort of conflicts is propaganda as well, because like both sides will want to show their strength. And as I said, I don't know much on this subject, but I think as Cuba being a communist country as well, and I think they were inspired by the Soviet Union. I know this is off topic, but I think I read somewhere there was a weird fact about Fidel Castro. Apparently, he had a favorite cow, and he practically milked it to death, and then erected a statue in its honor. Sorry, I know that was a bit random and off topic, but I thought it might have been a good idea to share it.
Defense Secretary McNamara argues that the missiles haven't changed anything in practice. The U.S. still has a massive advantage in destructive deterrence. The Joint Chiefs strongly disagree. National Security Advisor Bundy believes in a limited airstrike as fit punishment and a warning.
Wow.
General Taylor is opposed for fear of not knocking out all of the missiles. Robert Kennedy wants to know if invasion after a partial strike is an option. His main concern is that if there are any missiles at all left in place, they can be used to deter the U.S. from taking action against revolutionary activity in other parts of Latin America. The president expresses shock that the Soviets have been willing to take this enormous risk of provocation. He is undecided what action to take, but wants to know if all possible options are in preparation. McNamara assures him that they are. They agree to continue planning for all eventualities and to revisit the issue tomorrow, and they will continue gathering intelligence via spy plane activity. So at the end of this first day of crisis, the world goes to sleep without knowing that the wheels of war have been set in motion by Moscow, Havana, and Washington. It will be several days until the world finds out, but by then the crisis will have deepened, and many of the fears expressed in the White House this day will look like they are coming to pass. The President and First Lady dine with guests that evening. One of them is the philosopher Sir Isaiah Berlin. In his book, Two Concepts of Liberty, Berlin argues that there are two concepts of freedom. Negative freedom, which is freedom from interference, and positive freedom, which asks not what we are free from, but what we are free to do. Little does Berlin know that his host that evening has neither of those freedoms.
Wow.
This was the first episode of our daily coverage of the 13 days of the crisis. Our next project of this kind is our minute-by-minute coverage of the attack on Pearl Harbor that will air on our World War II in real-time channel December 7th this year. The teaser for that project is right here. Now, to get to Pearl Harbor in the first place, we need your membership in the Time Ghost Army. So far, we have only a fraction of the budget put together. So sign up for the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And tomorrow, on day 2 of the Cuban Missile Crisis, thoughts turn to action. See you tomorrow.
That, again, I'll do it. That's been another interesting video, and it's good to see Indy Nidell again reacting to his... presenting historical videos. I think he's a brilliant host for this, and you know what? I think I will make this a reaction series. I'll react to the entire series of the Cuban Missile Crisis by Time Ghost History. So I'll just subscribe, put a like, and so yeah. This has been an interesting video. As I said, I'm not very clued up about the Cuban Missile Crisis or anything related to the Cold War. So, yeah, I can't really add much more to that. So, anyway, if you enjoy this reaction, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.